Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome to Simplify Complex Job Costing with Sage Intacct. We're very happy to have you with us today. Let me go through a few housekeeping items. If you are here for CPE credit, please know that you must answer all poll questions, and you'll know when they pop up. Misty will give you, we'll have a slide that says poll questions, and then there will be a pop-up screen that will give you the question and your answer options. So if you have any questions during the course of the presentation, please use the Q&A function for for Zoom webinar. And then following the webinar, you're going to receive an email from me, and it will have the slides from this recording as well as a link to the actual recording itself. So you get both the visual aids and the audio visual aids, as well as a link to a survey. And I ask that you allow up to 48 hours to receive that. Well, with that out of the way, it's my great pleasure to introduce Misty Palick. She is the Sage Intech Construction Practice Lead at LBMC Technology Solutions. Misty comes to us with decades of experience in the construction industry, both firsthand working for construction companies early in her career, and then pivoting to accounting and construction technology. If you go to the user group meetings, you will probably see Misty there. She has also spoken on many topics for us and as well as at industry events. So, Misty, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody, and again, thanks for the warm introduction, Dawn. These are today's learning objectives. So first, we're going to learn how Sage Intech Construction streamlines tracking of labor, materials, and overhead for accurate job cost reporting. We're going to see how automation reduces manual data entry, minimizes errors, and accelerates cost allocation. Explore how real-time dashboards and reports provide up-to-date insights into job profitability and cost trends. Discover how Sage Intacct integrates with project management tools, one of my favorites, and in accounting systems to enhance workflow efficiency, and learn how to leverage job costing data to improve forecasting, budgeting, and overall financial performance. So first off, I'd like to introduce LBMC Technology Solutions, of whom I'm proud to represent. And as you can see here, we're more than just a software supplier. We offer comprehensive solutions for your organization's entire IT ecosystem, from IT services, solutions, and support to automation tools that simplify your life, and ERP implementations, of course. We cover it all. Plus, our full development team is ready to help you build whatever you need. That's just our technology division. There's even more to explore. We're like a family here, and as you can see, our expertise goes beyond just the technology division. We offer services in accounting and finance, human resources, cybersecurity, wealth advisory, and even staffing. But why choose LBMC? As a collective firm, we've achieved a great deal over our 40-year career. Our certification as a great place to work demonstrates that we truly value our people as one of our most treasured assets. I'm one of those people, so happy to be here. And how does picking the right partner mitigate risk? I actually have a great little story and analogy for you so that you could understand, what picking the right partner does to mitigate risks. So a few years ago, an inland hurricane actually hit my hometown, and everyone needed a new roof because the high winds destroyed our community's roofs. And at the time, it was hard to find a roofing company because there was so much work to be done. And we chose a company that did a decent job on our roof, but then soon went out of business. So they voided our 30-year warranty because our future work would have to be done by a different company. And the point here is that you'll want to choose a partner who's going to be around for the long haul. We have had many years of experience implementing Sage Intacct, and we follow a tried and true methodology, as you can see here. And more importantly, we've been in the business for 40 years. So you can trust that we'll be here when it's time to replace the roof of your business. And then why choose Sage Intech Construction? So across all the industries, not just construction, but Sage Intech customers experience 200 150% return on investment. I think that is so impressive. With a cloud-based product, you can be up and running faster because there's less software setup time. 6 months payback, and we mean it. True cloud capabilities really automate many tasks, freeing you up to focus on more important things. Enjoy a 79% reduction in close time and a 65% improvement in productivity. And lastly, if you're not familiar with the AI CPA, they wrote the book on accounting and are the eminent authority in accounting. They use and recommend Sage Intacct over any other product, which speaks volumes about Sage Intacct's strength in accounting. And I will mention just real quickly that LBMC Technology Solutions, we use Intacct also. We definitely eat what we serve, and we do it very well, in my opinion. I've had great success, getting the reports we need. We have projects, all of the things that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so Sage has been a key player in the construction industry for quite some time. And did you know that there are over 50,000 construction customers using some version of Sage? And if you didn't know it, there are over 30 flavors of Sage in all sorts of industries besides construction. 48% of these customers are leaders in the industry, in the construction industry specifically. 53 are very large contracting firms. So I always look at the other half, to say that 47% are actually small to medium-sized firms. So there's room for everybody. Sage has also been ranked as the #1 provider of accounting and estimating solutions year after year. Clearly, Sage is a trusted partner in the construction industry. So let's talk for a minute about the pillars of Sage Intech Construction. Here you can see the 4 pillars of Sage Construction product suite, as we call it, with the clouds representing the products that integrate seamlessly with Sage Intacct. It's important to keep this in mind when considering third-party software. By staying within the Sage family, the systems communicate with each other, leading to improved efficiency for your company and eliminating the need for double data entry. Now, I don't want you to take that as there's not third parties that are even better than these options that we're demonstrating today. So I want you to take a look at this slide. And this is just a few of the integrating partners into Sage Intech Construction. So due to the open architecture of Sage Intacct, which is true cloud software, it integrates seamlessly with many construction-specific third-party applications. And these are just to name a few, right? There's an entire Sage Intech marketplace dedicated to integration partners. And this is why so many companies are actually switching to the cloud. Their reliable operational software is already there, while their existing outdated legacy accounting software or ERP system can't keep up with the modern integration needs. So let's look at what an integration pathway could look like for your company. So recently, I actually integrated a client. I transitioned them from Sage 100 Contractor. They didn't have an operational software per se, and they were doing their payroll all in Sage 100 Contractor. So they shifted to Sage Intacct, Procore, and ADP all at the same time. It was a really fun project, really enjoyed it. But this was the integration pathways map that we came up with. And this isn't just about the touch points and which way they're going. Are they one way or bi-directional between the different systems? It was more about a task list of items that needed to be done for this employer and how those were going to get accomplished. Were they coming from which system, Procore, Intacct, or ADP? Who was doing those actual processes? So it's kind of color-coded as well. And then you can see the different areas. Obviously master records over here on the left. You're going to see what comes from Procore, what needs to be generated in Procore, and then pushed to Sage Intacct, and where it ends up in Sage Intacct. And then you have purchasing, kind of the same thing. And then revenue, actually, with this particular project, revenue doesn't really touch Intacct yet. They are working on some of those integration points still. But however, it's a great product. There's tons of great products out there as far as third-party operational softwares go. Procore just happens to be a very popular one. And so I have lots of clients on that who want to go to Sage Intacct. And this is how we help those companies get there, as we would provide a mapping of the integration pathways. So we would be able to say, this is how we're going to take you from where you are today to the future of having integrated and efficient systems all together. So when collaborating with the external marketplace partners, it's crucial to understand how tasks will be executed from a business process workflow perspective. And this map, again, just breaks down where the master records originate, where they go, along with typical construction tasks involved in processing business transactions. So with a partner like LBMC, we'll help you map out all the points so you can safely reach your destination. Dawn, I'm going to actually have you launch our first poll question, if you don't mind.
All right, happy to do that. So you should be able to see the poll question. What is your biggest challenge with job costing today? Is it concern over accuracy, that it's a manual process, perhaps? Maybe you don't have the visibility that you would like, or thinking back what Misty just presented with the Procore and Sage Intacct, maybe you don't have the integration that you'd like to have between payroll and other systems. And then there's other is always a choice.
And I'd like to say this is a judgment-free zone. So nobody is going to say, oh, I can't believe you do it because of lack of integration. Like everybody has their own situation and it's all acceptable. We just have to find a better way to do it.
All right, I'm going to end the poll. And just one more reminder that if you are wanting to get CPE credit for this particular webinar, you must answer all the poll questions. It's our way of verifying your attendance and participation. So, Misty, it is pretty even all across the board, with lack of integration having a slight edge over concerns about accuracy, the fact that it's a manual process, or other challenges.
Yeah, I would believe that. I really would. Like I said, everybody just has their own little situation or quirks that's unique to their business. And I'm a big advocate for those companies of don't change everything at once, right? Like take some baby steps and walk before you run. So very important to understand that. Okay, let's take a look about the accounting buckets for a minute. Now, recently, if you've ever seen anything about Sage Intacct, you're gonna see this picture and think, huh, that kind of looks familiar, but we used to demonstrate it in a little bit different way. And so when we look at the chart of accounts, which is your general ledger buckets, and so traditional trends, tends to put all the segments of the business into one big bucket. You can see that over here in linear thinking, right? We're going to put our base account, our project, our location, our class department, any kind of segregation that we want usually goes in our chart of accounts. And that's typically how legacy ERP systems are developed, right? Like a lot of even the construction ones like Sage 300 CRE, Sage 100 Contractor has a little bit of dimension, but these are linear thinking, with which I want you to know there's nothing wrong with linear thinking. That's how we've done it for probably 100 years, right? Like it just made sense. But then I want you to consider what dimensional thinking brings to the table. So if you look at this more modern approach with dimensional accounting, each segment of the business gets its own separate bucket. This means you can look at one bucket at a time, keeping them all segregated, or you can dump all the buckets together. So you can see here as linear thinking, this would be a typical string in the chart of accounts, right? You're going to have your GL account, your department, your location, and your class, and then so on and so forth. So you might have 10 segments in your chart of accounts to accommodate that. And so your chart of accounts gets really bloated and much too big to handle. So we do it differently in Intacct, and we keep all these things separate, and then they can play together on reporting. So, we'll totally get into that when we get into Sage Intacct. So this is the first conversation we're going to have about dimensions and the power of dimensions. So you can see how linear thinking keeps all your accounts in a single string, and dimensional thinking lets you pivot on any dimension to gain better insights and make faster decisions. Because we are evolved as a accounting society, I would say that we need to make decisions fast, and we need to trust the data so that the decisions are accurate. Now let's talk about construction accounting for just a second. And understanding the construction accounting can be a bit tricky, right? Typically there's a breakdown structure under the project cost and cost of goods sold, but not usually with the income. You can see that on the left side over here, what profit and loss statement looks like coming out of Sage Intacct. This is what you're going to see today, right? We have our revenue just kind of lumped together. It's barely ever split out, with the project costs of labor, materials, equipment in the revenue sector. Revenue is usually broke out like types of work, is it residential, industrial, commercial? And then your project costs are broke out by what we call cost types. So we have labor, material, equipment, subcontract, and other. So I'm going to be demonstrating today, how this really benefits you. So this is a typical construction accounting 101 screen here. So there are two key differences for construction companies on a profit and loss statement. One, for tax and bonding purposes, it's crucial to have a detailed job cost breakdown. Like you need that more than anything for those two purposes. There's a whole lot more purposes that you need that job cost breakdown on, but typically that's where it starts, right? People, companies are like thinking, okay, for tax purposes, to know how much I need to pay taxes on, and somebody to prepare my taxes, I need to have a construction accounting profit and loss statement. Because if you dump it all into, say, operating expenses, your tax accountant wouldn't know what was related to a job and what was not, because without those jobs, you wouldn't have those expenses. And so you might pay more or less taxes depending on that. And then there's usually an allocation between operating and job costs. So in some of the examples I'm going to share today, we are splitting labor between operating and cost of goods sold. So that's a very typical practice, especially for construction companies, that if a employee puts time into a project, then they are considered billable. If they have time that's not related to a project, then that would be considered operating expenses. And so there's usually an allocation, and I will demonstrate that here shortly, that you're going to, separate those two. And really how, again, it starts is that you're going to need it for tax purposes. The second part is then you're going to, need it for bonding reports. And then the third part is that you're going to need it so that you can understand your job profitability. Very important, right? You can't get there without having some granular job costs or a work breakdown structure, which is what we're going to talk about next. So in construction and project management, I'm thinking that the people who are on this call today who are really construction focused probably have seen this in some manner. It might not look exactly like this, but a work breakdown structure really lets you get detailed with your sub buckets. So I'd like you to think back to that bucket slide I was sharing earlier. And those buckets, could be your project, your cost code, or your task, and then your cost type. So that's a very typical bucket division for a construction company. They usually have a project, they might have a cost code, and then they might have a cost type. So they're not mandatory, but that is how we're going to talk, through how you get that granularity in a job cost reporting today. So project is usually at the top. It's kind of a shell of the other things. And then you have divisions sometimes, which is site work, foundation, framing. Sometimes you have that, sometimes you don't. I tell companies it's okay to be simplistic in the beginning. Most companies who grow and they get to a certain point, they're going to outgrow that structure. And it might be driven by the owner of the project saying you need to provide more work breakdown structure and for billing purposes, or it might be your bonding company that says you need that, or it might be your tax accountant. So there's many needs for this, but a lot of times, newer companies, they start out simple. They might just have division and that's it. And then they grow into cost codes and cost types. But when we get into Intacct, you'll really see that functionality of how it's dividing up the buckets. So this is just an example of what a WBS might look like. And for each project, right, each project is kind of set up like this. And each company really organizes its cost groups differently. But ultimately, a WBS helps you pinpoint the start of an issue and correct it before it escalates. So it's really important to understand, like you need to be proactive instead of reactive on these projects. You could spot things earlier if you trust the data. And if you don't trust the data, then I would say that you need to look at your system and decide, is it the data being put in? Is it the data coming out? Okay, so let's take this a step further. And thanks to this work breakdown structure, you can create your own custom and detailed reports, right? Making it easier to understand how your job costs are broken down. And on the profit and loss statement shown earlier, there were job cost accounts, usually in the 5,000 or 50,000 range. That is just a GAAP principle that we all kind of follow, that those ranges of numbers actually mean something to, you know, an accounting person or a tax person. They're going to look at those accounts and make sure that your range is appropriate. So cost of goods sold, that 5,000 or 50,000 range, that general ledger account range, is actually what's going to go on your profit and loss statement. So just to understand that. So typically 5,000, 50,000 is job related, 6,000 to 60,000, right? Like it depends on how many digits you have in your general ledger accounts. Those are usually and typically overhead. So these accounts are linked to a job, a cost code, and a cost type. So it kind of provides a shell, like I was saying. So let's look at how it's nested in Sage Intacct. So think of a project as just the shell of this that contains the work breakdown structure for job cost reporting. And all three of these little charts I've shown you guys today really is the same thing, just looking at it in a different way. So the cost code usually aligned with two areas: the project budget. So you have budgeted cost based on cost code. And that might be, you know, broke down by divisions. And then underneath those divisions, you have a bunch of cost codes underneath there. So typically in construction, there's now 48 divisions, which seems crazy because I remember when there was only 16 divisions and that was pretty standard. So we've expanded on that greatly. Sometimes that overcomplicates things, but for those bigger companies that really need that detail, it is important to recognize all 48 divisions. And then underneath those divisions, you know, those are kind of your headers to your cost codes. And then underneath those divisions, you have all the details, the breakdowns underneath those divisions. And so I know that this is general expenses or general requirements, number one. And then 1790 is a cost code underneath that called truck expenses. So that's my cost code. And cost code structures can vary from system to system. I know like Procore actually requires some pretty stringent like length requirements. And I've had some challenges with that because when we get into Intacct, you know, those cost codes typically start with 0, like there'll be 01 space 02 space 03. And those zeros give us a lot of problems in Intacct. So I tried to change methodology with some companies, but sometimes it's too late, right? We get there too late and they're already, you know, integrated with Procore. They've got all their cost codes figured out and you just have to use what's there. So it's totally doable. But I just want you to know that, you know, cost codes can be tricky and they can be complex, but they don't have to be. They can be simple also. And then cost type is actually baked underneath the cost code. So these are typical, there's usually 10 divisions in this segment, and they're usually material, subcontract, equipment, labor, like internal labor. Sometimes they'll have like overhead labor broke out and regular versus overtime. So there's a couple flavors of labor in there, and then they'll have an other one. And so when we get to some reporting, you'll start to see, you know, how that's really broke down. But this is basically your work breakdown structure inside of Sage Intacct. This is how it's nested together. And in fact, this is also how it's nested in Sage 300 CRE and Sage 100 Contractor. Now, QuickBooks, they haven't, like QuickBooks Online, they have a project, they have a cost code, they don't really have a cost type yet. So, you know, I do know that that product is advancing and evolving. So hopefully someday they'll have a cost type too, because that really does help you figure out how much material you bought on, you know, say woods and lumber, or how much labor you've spent on general requirements. So it just really helps you understand not just the cost code, but also the cost type underneath there helps you understand how you're doing against a budget. Also, many times the schedule of values that you use for progress billing has the same structure, because if it is what's called a cost plus billing, you know, you're going to list out your schedule of values, which matches your budget. It's just selling amount versus cost amount, right? Your budget is you know, just cost, and then your proposal or your selling amount, your contract is selling amount, you know, like your contract amount. But often they reflect each other. So that means that your schedule of values might match your budget based on this work breakdown structure. Hopefully hopefully there's no questions, Don. We're going to actually do our next poll question too, please.
Alrighty, and I don't see any questions in the Q&A. But a good reminder for folks that if you do have a question, please enter it there. So here's our next question. How do you currently track job costs?
Again,
Time-honored spreadsheets, doing it manually. Maybe you have software in place, mixed mode, or maybe you're unsure about what's being used in your company.
I'm guessing it's gonna be all across the board. Because everybody does it a little bit differently,
Yep,
for sure.
absolutely. All right, just a reminder, if you are here for CPE, please make your selection. I'm going to close down the poll. And Misty, you were absolutely right. I mean, it is 25, the only one that didn't get selected was manually. So 25% for spreadsheets, 25% for software, 25% mixed, and 25 unsure.
Excellent. Yeah, I remember the manual. I could share a little story real quick of how we used to do job costs back in the day. We would get accounts payable invoices coming in from all sorts of angles. Sometimes they were emailed, sometimes they were dropped off at the office, sometimes they were snail mailed. We got them in all sorts of ways. Sometimes the superintendent would drop them off at the office, and those were the ones we really didn't want to touch because they'd been out in the field and had stuff spilled on them, and they were really gross. So it's like, I don't think I want to touch that. I'm gonna put on some gloves before I do that. But we had these great little sticky notes. Sometimes some companies I worked for had a stamp, and they would stamp that AP invoice, and then they would code it, and then it would get routed to a project manager for approval, and then it would come back to accounting eventually, and then we would enter it into the system. So I remember that manual process very clearly. There was a lot of handwriting involved, and then the project managers, I would always put it in a red folder. And they would just hate me for it. They would just be like, oh, I don't want to see that red folder. And that means work for us, because they had to go through each invoice and make sure that the purchase order matched and that they received all the items on that invoice. And it took a lot of coordination on the project management side to actually get an invoice approved. And then in accounting, we also had the problem with that manual process because we would make a log of all the invoices that we gave to the project manager, physically put in their hands in that red folder, and only half of them would come back to us. And so they would hold on to those invoices, or they would give them to somebody else to look at, or they take them out in the field with them, and then they never return. And so we had a big challenge with getting all of the documents we gave them back again. So I remember that manual process very clearly. So I just want to talk about this a little bit more before we jump into Sage Intacct. So you can really create detailed reports to pinpoint exactly where you're losing money and where you're making it, because at the end of the day, that's really what you want to know on a job. You want to know how profitable they are. And then you can start to think about, once you know that, you can start to see things and predict things and say, oh, we've got a problem here because we're over budget or we're under budget. What happened? Did the subcontractor not show up? So you can be predictive as a project manager by looking at this work breakdown structure. So it not only helps accounting and finances and bonding reports and all of that, but it really helps project managers too to know how they're doing on their projects. Is there anything that they need to watch out for, or there's all sorts of variables here when you're looking at a job cost report like this one. And this one actually came from Sage Intech Construction. And you can see here's our primary project. We could have sub projects, we don't. Here's our group cost code. And so these are our divisions. And then you'll notice like O1 is general requirements, because that's pretty typical. All zeros is procurement and contracting requirements. We have cost codes, and then underneath there, labor, material, subcontract, equipment, and other overhead. That is actually your cost types. So it's breaking down by cost code, what your estimate was, what your actual was, what's the variance. So you can see like administrative requirements. I would look at this and go, we have $44.48 on a project this size. I'm probably not too worried about $44, but I would be looking for those variances to say, why did they happen? Is there something I need to do? Do I need to do a change order? Is, somebody putting something to the wrong cost code that's not in my budget? There's all sorts of variables that cause those variances in a work breakdown job cost report. So this is just one way to demonstrate that this is by division, cost code, and then your cost types across the top. And then of course we have totals. And then, when you're looking at like a bonding report, you're really looking at like how much the contract was, how much we billed against that contract. Without that really good work breakdown structure, you don't get a lot of that detail. So I often tell companies, and this is an old adage of garbage in, garbage out. And so if you're not taking the time to really break down these structures and follow these structures all the way through, because if you have this structure set up as an estimator, as a project manager, and then it gets turned over to accounting and they start costing against it, if the costing side is not following your schedule of values, your work breakdown structure, then this report isn't going to work for you. So it is important for everybody to understand that work breakdown structure, how important it is and how it affects all areas of a project, right? And not just the project, but also the company's financials as well. So this is, just one of the many examples that we're going to look at today that came actually out of Sage Intech Construction. And I want to discuss for just a second the project lifecycle. Took my time. Okay, so I actually created this little triangle because it was so important to really express, the project life cycle. Every project goes through some form of this, even if it's a day long, or even if it's an hour long. Some projects, all projects go through some kind of life cycle until they're closed out. And so I like to think of, well, my project is up here on the top, my estimate and budget is over here on the left. This is how much I said it was going to cost. And then this is my contract. So this is what I'm billing off of. This red triangle in the middle is procurement, right? Like that's where all the gooey stuff happens in this case, right? The costs are incurred, then they're job costed, and then they're billed to the owner, finally. So this is a typical project life cycle on any project. No matter the duration, this is typically what happens. So what are some examples, of where job costs actually come from? So these costs incurred come from several different places. They can, as you can see here, right, they come from a variety of areas, everything from purchase orders to subcontracts, to time entry, to credit cards, journal entry allocations, equipment purchases. Like there's all sorts of ways that job costs happen. And I'm sure if you're watching this presentation, you have an image of how all of these things connect in your company. For example, the advantage of using purchasing commitments is twofold. If you have inventory, you're probably already using purchase orders. But the other advantage to using purchasing commitments like subcontracts is for prediction of cost to complete. So that is a very important activity that happens with construction companies. And it's really happens for many reasons. Sometimes it's driven by tax personnel who are saying you have to have a percentage of completion. So what happens is if your company is over a certain amount of sales, then you have to report your work in process and your cost to complete. So you have to prepare a journal entry once a month that basically says, are you recognizing enough revenue or too much revenue? That's basically what you're doing. And it's driven by tax people. It's also driven by project management, because project management needs to know on their projects how far along they are complete. Like you want to be predictive and say, well, I know that I've committed to these 5 subcontractors, for example, and all their bills total $1 million of our $10 million contract. And so if we've only received 500,000 of those subcontracts, I know that I've committed to spend another 500,000. So it's important to recognize commitments as well. And those can be, a lot of people call them different things, but most of the time they're purchase orders and subcontracts. And they're really important for predicting the future of the job. To understand, scheduling is also important based on subcontracts and purchase materials, that those drive those schedules. A project schedule will be driven by purchasing commitments, because we need to know when is the material delivered, when is the subcontractor going to be done, And then, can we move those subcontracts to a different job when they're done, or what's the next step for them? So that this whole thing, job cost, affects so many things outside of just project management or accounting. It really runs the entire project for sure. And Dawn, I'm gonna actually have you do the third poll question, and then we're actually gonna jump into Sage, and I'm gonna show you around in there.
Awesome. All right, this one is kind of thinking ahead to what your future might hold. What feature would bring the most value to your job costing process? And on this question, you can answer more than once. It's a multiple, you can choose multiple responses. So we've got automation, reports, integration, forecasting.
Yeah, these are all really important too. I'll be interested to see the results, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody does it just a little bit differently, but I can bet everybody's doing it, right? They might do it differently, but I can bet they're doing it. It might just be
Well,
sometimes too, though.
yeah, the 80% of our audience is they would like to see automation. That doesn't surprise me at all. And then 40% each for reports and integration, and forecasting, just bare minimum. So people must really be on top of their forecasting.
Yeah, I'm sure that is true, of everybody wants automation now, like it's available to us, and we're all excited and anxious about AI, and that's one of the ways that AI really can help us, is be more efficient and have that automation. Okay, let's pop over to Sage Intacct and take a look around here. I actually prepared something special for you guys today that I'm going to get to. I'm really excited that it actually worked for me because I have had to import journal entries before, but I actually was successful today with a little help of a colleague. So Connor, if you're on the call, thank you for your help today. Okay, so this is Sage Intacct, and as you can see here, I'm just logged in using Google Chrome. It is browser agnostic. I always like to cover the basics with Sage Intacct because I don't know who on the call has seen it before. So this is, I'm logged in as Emma the controller, and Emma has all the security clearance that we need. We do have enterprise level security in Sage Intacct, and so we can always control who can see what, when, where, and how. Emma has that security clearance. This is a role-based CFO dashboard. Obviously, not everybody in your organization would have access to this dashboard, but I like to show it because it's got some great numbers up here at the top. It also has some pretty charts, and obviously I'm a colorful person, so I like color and like to show that off. All of these charts and numbers are coming from the system, right? So this is data that's put in, and then it's analyzing that data and producing a cool dashboard. So dashboards are unlimited. They're very easy to create. You can create them globally or user defined, depending on what you want your security clearance to be. And you can simply drag things around, move them around, add new widgets. Very easy to build a new dashboard. And these are just based off data. And so again, as a CFO dashboard, not everybody would have access to this particular dashboard. I am going to mention for just a second that Sage Intacct is multi-entity. And what that means is you can have all of your companies inside of Intacct, which is really incredible. And I think it's the star of the show for Intacct, right? The intercompany transactions work really well together. We actually presented on that last month. But I am going to mention that. And then we're going to start talking about dimensional accounting. So we talked a little bit about it. Most of you who are in construction are used to having a dimensional structure. You may not call it that, but you have had one. You've had job before. You might have had class. You probably have cost code and cost type of some sort that you're keeping track of, right? Those are dimensions. Well, Intacct takes it a step further, right? With that dimensional thinking, we have separate buckets. So I always like to show this here. So this is admin. We don't have any buckets selected yet or dimensions. So we're going to look at this and we're going to say bank charges are 2060 and 80 cents. If I drill down, because I have clearance, I'm able to see what breaks that down. And these are general journals. This is an accounts payable. And we could go down into that, but I'm going to pause for just a second, come back here and choose a location. So a location is an entity or actual physical location underneath a company. So you can see here that we are at the top level. And if I chose like this entity, this is an entity, and I know that because it has a 100, not a 110. 110, 120 live underneath that entity. But I'm going to hit apply, and it's going to go out to the system, take about 30, not even 30 seconds, probably 15 seconds to populate. And it's looking at all those entities, all those dimensions, and bringing back the data that is only related to this one. So if you'll remember when we were looking at this earlier, it was 2080. Now it's only 1378 because it's only looking for this location because we chose it as a filter. And if I drill down on this, I'm going to be able to see a lot less transactions. And if I go down into this actual journal entry, which I'm going to show you here real quick. Oh, I went too fast. It isn't like when you go fast. I actually have a sign in my office that says my brain has too many tabs open. I really think that's true. So you can see here, this is a journal entry, and you can see all the breakdown here, right? Like if we were just looking at the one location, which was to 100, it's actually should be pulling in all of these 110s as well if we're looking at this entity. But I want you to see where those dimensions come from. So as you're transacting with each line, you can pick a customer, a vendor, an employee, an item, a warehouse. We've got location, department, channel, project. So these are all our different buckets that we have eligible to us to pick from. And how that really helps us is to segregate our data and allow us to, come back and see this data based on one of those dimensions. And when we get over to, this is actually a wholesale distribution demo company. So when we get over there, you're going to be able to the construction side, you're going to be able to see, oh, we have a project filter, we have a cost code filter. We can really get granular with it. So I just want to cover, Sage, the basics of Sage Intacct real quick here. It is just a website that you're going to log into, but you do have security clearance. And it is, again, browser agnostic. You could use any browser of your choosing. Are there any questions, Don? I just want to make sure real quick before I hop over to construction.
No questions.
Awesome. Okay, so this is a construction environment, and this is called a project performance dashboard. I really like this dashboard. I think it can come canned with your instance when you get Intacct implemented for you. This is a really important one, and it tells you everything about all the jobs at once. So if you are a stakeholder in the company and you're like, I just want to know how all our jobs are doing as a collective whole. I'm looking at all these different entities, all these locations under my entities, all the projects under the locations, and so on and so forth. So you can get really granular with that look. So you'll notice we've got some KPI cards, and as I hover over things, if I wanted to click on that, because I have security clearance, I could easily see, our inception to date, our project costs. And this is for every job we've ever had, every entity, every location. So I'm able to, drill down and find out what makes up those numbers. You'll also notice that we can keep track of things that are non-monetary. So we have active jobs. These are called statistical accounts. So we can set up triggers to say every time someone creates a job, tally me one. So we can put that on a dashboard, really great. You can have to-dos on a dashboard. Like I have some dashboards that are like for purchasing in the warehouse, and they just need to see how many things they have in stock, or they need to see how many AP bills they need to approve, whatever they need to do in the system. They can have that on their dashboard, right? This is actually set up as a global dashboard so everybody can see it, but you can limit views if you so wish to. Here is a project overview report, and I'm going to zoom in if I can just a little bit. I really think this is like a whip report, to be honest. I think it shows you exactly what you need to know on all your projects, so this has all the active projects. We're just looking at active. And you can see our original contract, any approved change orders, what is our budget and estimate. And I could drill down on these things. That's why you see the little magnifying glass coming up. One of the things I really love about this report is commitments. There hasn't been a lot of reports in my I don't know, 28 years that I've seen in other legacy systems that actually show you commitments. I would like to see a column added that says remaining commitments, right? Like, so I'm going to do that someday. But this shows you the commitments on this project that you've committed to spend. So if you're planning on spending $432,000 on this job, half of it is already committed with the purchasing buyout process, right? Like you're going to do that procurement process. You're going to write subcontracts and purchase orders. They all go to commitments in the system. And then you can see how much was billed out on the project. This, is fantastic at understanding progress billing. So it has project contracts and you're going to bill against those contracts constantly on these projects. Now, that's not to say you can't just do a quick time and materials billing or I just need to get an invoice out. There's lots of ways to invoice, but it does do progress billing pretty well. We have total costs. So these are all the costs that have come to this project. And if we're looking at this, we can see that these were a wage allocation. And I know that just by looking at the journal, because we have different journals in the system. And then I did just pass an accounts payable. There might be an accounts payable in here. These are all your job costs. There we go. There's accounts payable. So these are subcontractor invoices that are coming in. And I'll drill down on that just real briefly here to show you what does that look like. So you're typically going to convert a subcontract into a bill. So this subcontracts work much like our project contracts, right? We receive progress billings against this. And if you're using a product like Sage Construction Management or Procore, these come in from those systems already approved. And so they don't really hit your books until they have been approved. So those job costs, again, just like in my PowerPoint that I was demonstrating, they come from all sorts of places. That is totally true. So these total costs are actually costs incurred on the project. And then you're always knowing, what's your gross profit, what's your spend, what's your build profit margin. That's pretty standard. But then if you take it a step further and you're like, I want to see it by project manager. I want to know how each project manager is doing on their jobs. You could do that because employee dimension or an employee is a dimension. So you can break out these reports about, by each dimension. And then you could also do it by job type. So they have restaurants, hotels, retail, all that shown here. We have a backlog report, which is, just showing you backlog that you have on the books. So these are backlog projects, haven't started yet in the system. And then you can even break it down by, this is a standard profit and loss by project type, which is pretty cool. Like I can see, okay, restaurants are at 17.25%. So what's my biggest one? What is happening in tenant improvement, right? Like I would be saying 144 in the negative, like something's wrong there. Somebody needs to look at that. But you could really start to predict as a company whole how you're doing, what segments or lines of business are making you the most money, which ones do you need to pay attention to, which ones have issues, like you could really start to predict how your company is going to do based on some of these reporting. This one's just for restaurants, so it is showing the projects across the top and then a standard P&L report. And these just come canned with the system. We didn't do anything special. And it's really because of that dimensional accounting. So I'm going to click on here and just show you hotels, for example. And it's going to do the same thing we did in the wholesale distribution thing. It's going to go out to the entire system and look for anything that is tagged to that grouping of project type, right? So now I only have 2 projects to look at. Here's by project manager. So you're just filtering down the data to get granular so you can make faster decisions, right? Like you could set it up in many different ways using all sorts of dimensions, but the idea is that you're able to just keep things separate, but bring them back together when you want to. I'm going to pop over here to the project because we are going to run out of time. So my projects, right? Like I like to think of these as filing cabinets, and underneath my projects, there's all sorts of drawers that I pull out on my projects to look at, right? And if you'll remember my triangle, this project shell is at the top. My estimate or my budget is over here to the left of my triangle. And I'm just going to show you that real quickly here because now this is not estimating software. This is actually the budget for the job. you'll notice cost code, cost type, vendor amount. So this is how much we are expecting to spend on this project. It's broke down by cost code. That's what drives those reports that we were kind of seeing in my presentation that we're going to see a little bit more of. So if I close this, come back to the project, here's all my commitments for this job. I'm able to see all my subcontracts, and I bet you if I scroll to page 2, I'm going to see a couple purchase orders. I'm able to see basically a WIP report for my purchasing commitments. So if you are using purchasing commitments, which I highly recommend, you can easily see where you're at on the project and who's ahead of the game, who's behind the game. You can drill down and see a copy of their bill. All of that is related to these purchasing commitments. We definitely have change management. Change management, I tell people, is a three-way coin, if that's possible. So we have the owner change orders, we have the budget change orders, and we have the subcontract change orders. So we definitely have all of that in here, right? We do a change request, it becomes a change order when it gets approved. And then if you remember on my triangle over to the right, we have project contracts. And so these contracts are basically what you bill against. So you can see here, here's our contract, here's our original price, approved change price. If we have any change orders, how much is remaining left to bill on. We can even see the payments received. And we could drill down on some of that and get to the detail if we wanted to. We could also look at project invoices. So if we wanted to look at all the invoices that went to the owner on this project contract, that's just another drawer within our filing cabinet, right? We open it, we can see these, we can drill down on these. I will just show you that real quickly here. We'll see if we can print that. So it does use AIA forms. These are fully customizable. You can decide how it looks like. That was a bad example because that's not not done the right way. But you can print them on AIA format. No problem. You get to customize those forms. They work for you, however you need to do it. And then, so that's kind of our projects. And so everything is kind of housed under this shell, right? If I go to cost codes, this actually comes from the estimate. These are the cost codes that you have to choose to pick from. So what I prepared for you guys today is I'm actually going to go to a journal entry first, because that is one of the ways that costs actually hit a job, right? Like you're either doing payroll in the system where it's being allocated to the job directly, or you're doing a journal entry. So I prepared this journal entry, and I'm going to pull up my actual journal entry that I was able to import. And so you can import a lot of things into Sage Intacct, a whole bunch of things actually. I really love that feature so that you're not going copy and paste or having to fill out a document or a transaction every time. This was a payroll allocation. It's showing you, here's our account number that we need to hit. Here's our debits and credits, of course. Here's our project ID. This is cost code ID, employee ID, cost type ID, and location ID. These are all dimensions that I chose to hit. So when it got to Intacct, it looks like this. Now I need to zoom out a little bit, but you can see that it pulled in my employee, my project, my cost code, my cost type. So I have all of that information on my financials now, but also on my job cost reporting. So first I'm going to show you what that looks like on a profit and loss detail. Now we don't have any billing in here for March or February of this year, so that looks a little funny. But you can see here, this is where my labor went. And my journal entry actually split out from job cost to overhead cost. And I can see that here. So I can say my cost of sales, labor, 401k match, ER taxes, because I only care about what the employer's paying. I don't care about what the employee pays for taxes. I only care about what they cost us. So this kind of technically becomes your labor burden. And then down here, same way. This is what went to overhead. So you might have employees who are salaried and went to overhead. And then you have your 401k and ER taxes broke out that way. So that journal entry actually split in half and said, this is related to a project, put it there, and put it to these projects and these details. So if I drill down on that, and I clicked on one of these, it's going to take us back to that journal entry, and we're going to be able to see this went to Quick Bowls. Here's the cost code, the cost type. I'm able to see that full connection. Now we'll take a look at the cost overview. So this is just a standard cost report. I would be able to see that information, anything that hit this cost code 0131, that 102,000 actually came from that journal entry that I entered, and some more, not just that journal entry, but some more to date. So you're able to see it at that granular level also. Really important to understand. Okay, one last thing I'm going to show you real quick is another way that, obviously the subcontracts and commitments get converted into subcontracts. But when you are adding just a bill, you have that same breakdown. You have customer, project, cost code, cost type, allocation, department, location. And then if I drop the shade, as we call it, we're also going to have, employee, item, class. So think about it. You could actually allocate one bill across 1,000 jobs if that's what you wanted to do. So you can allocate those costs at the time of the transaction. You could do a journal entry. You can enter time and expenses against these projects. And again, if you are using some kind of payroll, you could, take a job and do your job costing automatically for you. So I'm going to pause there because I know it's a lot. I'm going to pop back to my PowerPoint real quick and hopefully close this out. It's a lot to understand, right? And we do have one last poll question for you.
We sure do. So for most of the hour, we've been showing you what Sage Intech Construction looks like, sort of the basic functionality of job cost. But you may be wondering, how would this work for me? And so what we're offering is what we call a lunch and learn, all about you with LBMC. And so you would attend and maybe bring some members of your team who would be shareholders in the or stakeholders in the implementation process and the change of solution. And we would take care of lunch, whether we do that virtually or whether we do that in person. And we would bring our construction experts to meet with your team. So please just take a moment, and if you would be interested in this, let us know, and we will reach out to you and set up a time to enjoy lunch and a construction conversation.
I'd love to meet you where you are.
Yeah,
Sure. Also, I'm just kind of letting you know that, I am the Sage Intech CRE practice lead, right? So you can reach out to me anytime, always available and ready to help you. And then we also have Eddie Finley, who is our sales director, who would be happy to have the conversation as well.
great.
Yeah.
And I'm taking one last look. No questions in the Q&A, so we'll just let you know what's coming up. In April, we've got streamlining multi-entity and multi-project accounting. Again, Misty will be presenting these through the lens of construction. And then in June, we'll be talking about how to automate your construction accounting workflows. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Misty, thank you so much for the presentation. And I hope to see everyone back here same time in April. Thank you.
Sounds wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.